Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside Australia's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, your host for the show. And we're here at the Governance Institute of Australia's National Conference. And it's a gathering of both company secretaries and directors to get their arms around the challenging topic of governance these days. And today's show, we're going to be talking about lessons from both sides of the board table. And I'm very pleased to have my guest joining me. Please welcome Alison Watkins, who's a Group Managing Director with Coca-Cola Amatil. But more importantly, she's a former non-executive director with Australia New Zealand Banking Group, Woolworths, and Just Group Ltd. So welcome, Alison.
Thank you, TK.
So with that makeup of CEO in your background and board member in your background, you're the perfect person to sort of ask this flip-flop question to. So the first part of the question is, how did your experience as a CEO make you better as a non-executive director?
Well, I think there's no question. On any board, you want to have a mix of different experiences, including former CEOs. So I think that you can be a great director without having been a CEO, but certainly I think being a CEO gives you a certain understanding of particularly what's involved in getting an organisation to change, which can be a really important contribution for you to make as a non-executive director. So only as a CEO do I think you really learn to appreciate sometimes how important it is to win hearts and minds of your organisation. And sometimes the choices that you have around change can mean that it's better to go slower to get a better result overall, a more sustainable result, than move fast. So quite often I see non-executive directors who don't have a CEO background feeling impatient and wanting to see change happen faster. So I think as a former CEO sitting on a board, you can temper that. There's also downsides, though, I would say, and sometimes as a former CEO you can have a tendency to want to get a bit more involved than you should as a non-executive director. You might want to start, you might forget that you're no longer in an executive role and start wanting to direct the traffic, perhaps step over that line between management and board a little bit more than you should. So there's puts and takes, but overall I think it comes back to having a board that has different mixes of experience and can make sure that the right questions get debated, including the questions about how far and how fast to move and what's realistic for the organisation.
So when I was a CEO, no one told me ahead of time how important it was, since the directors were only there 4 or 6 times, how important it was going to be to help lead the board without them feeling led. Okay, because that's the CEO that's going to do all that organizational stuff. So I think having that experience that you had, and particularly in Australia with a relationship with the chairman, like the comments that you just gave at the conference, that has to be very helpful in understanding when you were going to move to the other side of the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as a CEO, having had that former non-executive experience, I'm really empathetic of how it feels to be a non-executive director, and the obligation that you feel as a director, and also the desire that you have to contribute. But sometimes sitting on the CEO side of the table, the executive side, sometimes you can be a little bit dismissive. You can say, well, it doesn't feel like those non-executive directors really understand the business, they don't get it. And sometimes it can feel like a bit of a necessary evil. So I really aim to focus on making sure that every single one of our non-executive directors has the opportunity to contribute, particularly around their distinctive areas of expertise, and that we create those opportunities in between board meetings. We reach out to them. We might involve a particular director, for example, who we know has got a passion about sort of manufacturing, for example, to be a little bit more involved, and then they can come back to the boardroom and provide their perspectives. So how you involve directors and not just seeing them as people who show up and ask annoying questions at board meetings is really important. And I do think, I consider myself fortunate to have had that experience, and I think, we've got a great board and we get tremendous value out of our board between meetings, and I think that helps when we're in the meeting together. We're much more strongly aligned and supportive and understanding of what all of us are trying to do together.
Yeah. So when we take that question that I asked you and flip it around and say, how did serving as the non-executive director make you a better CEO? You knew as a director what frustrated you in the communications with the CEO. That had to help you from the CEO's perspective to say, I know I have to bridge this gap. Is that accurate? Very much
so. I think it taught me to respect every director as an individual, and to realise the importance of each individual and really having a relationship with each one of them, drawing on their particular strengths, having the offline conversations where you can see they've got some particular issues or concerns, treating each one of them very respectfully, rather than just sort of seeing the board as a amorphous whole and I only need to worry about the chairman.
So I want to switch gears just for a little, and in the couple minutes that we have left, I want to talk to you about sort of the paradigm that's occurring in the boardroom and in companies with this having a sense of purpose and possibly putting that ahead of the profit line or only profit line, versus what we've been probably familiar with, which has been the shareholder-centric, increase shareholder value the best you can, and then let them worry, use that money to do good, if you will, at some point in time. So this is creating a dilemma for some company because there's still short-term shareholders that really don't care about the purpose but want returns. And now we're seeing a huge movement on those that want purpose ahead. So it puts you in a situation of how do you please both groups of shareholders. And what we've seen in the US is at a large institutional investor, CalPERS, the California Pension Fund, in their last election of directors, they said, since the fund was underfunded, the retirement fund, they said, listen, we don't care where you invest, we want the largest returns that you can get. And they changed their officer group onto the party that was a proponent of that. So it's not that I'm not for environment improvement or healthy people or whatever. I'm going to be very curious to see if that is not mutually exclusive and that we can bring the shareholders into one group. But if it isn't, doesn't that put us as businesses in a very difficult position?
It's a really, really interesting and obviously an important discussion. And, for me, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but I see it absolutely aligned. So I think the role of our board is to represent the long-term oriented shareholder and to make decisions with that shareholder in mind. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have a whole lot of short-term shareholders, and all of our shareholders, they're certainly not a homogenous lot, that's for sure. But I think if a board thinks about itself from the mindset of what would a long-term shareholder want us to do here, then it becomes very easy to reconcile all of the interests of different stakeholder groups with the ultimate shareholder interest. And, I think that it is shareholders who appoint the board, and so that's ultimately the stakeholders to whom we're accountable. But we've got to think about it with a long-term time frame. So for us at Coca-Cola Amatil, we've got to think about what we're doing on reducing sugar, improving recycling outcomes, being a positive member of the communities that we're operating in and giving to our customers better value. We've got to think about all of those things. We've got to think about our people and growing and developing their careers. We've got to do it, though, in a way that is absolutely consistent with a long-term shareholder view of the world, and that's how I reconcile it.
Well, congrats to Coca-Cola, because I think you guys are not waiting for the pressure. You recognize that these are all things that you need to be on top of, and hopefully that'll work in your favor. So, Alison, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks very much, TK.
And that will conclude this edition. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again soon with our next edition of Inside Australia's Boardrooms, and we hope you join us. Thank you.